When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I'd finally found the kind of place people dream of settling down in. Clean sidewalks, kids riding their bikes, folks waving at each other across neatly trimmed lawns. The kind of community that looks like it came straight out of one of those glossy brochures. I bought my house because I wanted peace. I wanted to mow my lawn on Saturday mornings, sip a cold drink on my porch in the evenings, and maybe wave back at those neighbors. When they passed by, it wasn't a mansion, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, my little corner of the world, and I kept it in good shape. I was the type of guy who actually liked mowing the lawn. There's something satisfying about the smell of fresh-cut grass, and seeing those clean stripes appear behind the mower. My yard was never overgrown, never neglected, and frankly, it was one of the nicest on the street. So you can imagine my confusion the day I opened my mailbox and found a crisp, official-looking letter from the HOA. Bold letters at the top screamed mandatory notice. The letter explained that starting next month, every resident would be required to use the HOA's approved landscaping service. It claimed the change was to ensure uniformity and quality. But the more I read, the more ridiculous it sounded. The so-called service wasn't optional. It was mandatory. The rates listed on the letter were outrageous. Nearly $150 a month just for mowing and trimming. That's almost $1,800 a year for a job I was already doing myself for free. And there was no opting out. Even if you mowed your own lawn or hired someone cheaper, you still had to pay. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. Surely, they didn't mean me. So I went to the next HOA meeting. I sat quietly in the folding chairs as the president, Linda, a woman who seemed to thrive on her tiny position of power, rattled off neighborhood concerns. When they opened the floor, I stood and asked, as politely as I could, "Excuse me, but what about homeowners who already maintain their lawns? I mow mine every week. Why should I have to pay hundreds of dollars for a service I don't need?" Linda fixed me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not about you personally," she said. "It's about consistency. The board voted. Everyone will comply." That word comply hit me like a slap. Not cooperate, not agree. Comply, as though I were some disobedient child. I pushed back, keeping my voice calm but firm. "With respect, my property is well kept. I don't see how forcing me to pay for a service I don't want is fair." Her expression hardened. "If you don't follow the rules," she said slowly, "you'll face fines. Daily fines." There were a few murmurs in the room, but no one else spoke up. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between me and Linda. I realized then that this wasn't just about landscaping. This was about control. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I came home to find a bright yellow violation slip-taped to my front door. It read, "Non-compliant landscaping. Failure to use HOA-approved vendor." I laughed out loud. My grass had been mowed that very morning. The yard looked perfect. It wasn't about how the lawn looked. It was about money. It's about forcing me into a deal that made no sense. But here's the thing. They didn't know about me. I wasn't the type to roll over. I had a background in auditing and contract compliance. I spent years picking apart financial records and vendor agreements for a living. Numbers, contracts, loopholes, those were my bread and butter. If the HOA thought they could bully me with bogus fines and intimidation, they had no idea who they were messing with. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee and spread out every HOA letter, every notice, every shred of paperwork I'd received since moving. I read the landscaping contract line by line. I highlighted inconsistencies. I cross-checked dates, board meeting notes, vendor addresses. And as I dug deeper, a thought kept buzzing in the back of my head like an alarm. This wasn't just about landscaping. Something smelled rotten. This whole deal had the stench of corruption all over it. What started as a fight over my lawn was about to uncover something much bigger. And I was ready to tear it all down. The next morning, I woke up with a clear plan. If the HOA wanted a fight, I wasn't going to let them set the terms. I was going to fight smart. I started by digging deeper into this approved landscaping service. The letter had included the company name, Greenscape Solutions. At first glance, it looked like a normal local business. Their website showed glossy photos of freshly cut lawns, smiling employees and matching polo shirts, and slogans about excellence in neighborhood care. But when I checked the business registry, I noticed something odd. The company had only been formed 3 months earlier. 3 months. Yet somehow they'd already locked down an exclusive contract with our HOA. That didn't sit right. I called. The number listed on the HOA's notice. A man picked up. His voice was rough, impatient, like I'd interrupted his day. I asked about the services, trying to play the role of a curious customer. The more he talked, the clearer it became. They weren't a real operation. They had almost no staff, no equipment fleet, and their office address was a P.O. box. When I asked about references from other neighborhoods, he fumbled, stammered, then quickly changed the subject. That was my first clue. Greenscape wasn't built to serve the community. It was built to funnel money. Later that week, I attended another HOA meeting. This time, I went in with my eyes wide open. I watched how Linda, the president, talked about the landscaping contract. She was unusually insistent, brushing off any homeowner concerns with that same smug smile. She kept repeating phrases like the board has already approved it and there's no room for negotiation. But I noticed something else. She avoided details. When one neighbor asked how the company had been selected, Linda gave a vague answer about thorough vetting and quickly moved on. When another asked about the cost breakdown, she shut him down with "This is in the best interest of the community." That night, I had a beer with one of my neighbors, an older guy named Tom. He'd lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, long before Linda became president. Tom leaned in close and lowered his voice. "You're not the first to get into it with her," he said. "Every time there's money involved, Linda finds a way to insert herself. A few years back, she pushed everyone into switching trash collection companies. Prices doubled, and no one could explain why. You think she does this for free?" That confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't about landscaping at all. It was about kickbacks, so I doubled down. I spent hours after work pulling public records, looking up Greenscape's corporate filings, cross-referencing names. And that's when I found it. The smoking gun, Greenscape Solutions, was registered under the name of a man named Paul Richards. I nearly spit out my coffee when I read the details. Paul wasn't just some random businessman. He was Linda's brother-in-law. The pieces snapped together like a puzzle. Linda pushed the HOA to adopt this overpriced, mandatory service. Her brother-in-law owned the company. Homeowners paid inflated fees, and money quietly circled back to Linda's pocket. It was a textbook illegal kickback scheme. I sat back, in my chair, heart pounding. I knew I was sitting on dynamite. But information alone wasn't enough. If I went public too soon, Linda would spin it, claim it was all coincidence, maybe even try to smear me. I needed proof, undeniable proof, that she was abusing her position. So I started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every word spoken at meetings. I recorded calls, saved emails, and kept copies in a locked drawer. I even set up a hidden camera during one of the landscaping inspections the HOA sent to my property. What I caught on tape was damning. One of the so-called inspectors admitted, almost casually, that he didn't even know how to operate half the equipment. He wasn't a landscaper at all, just some kid they'd hired to walk around and look official. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. Linda wasn't just stealing from me. She was stealing from every single person in the neighborhood. Every homeowner, every family trying to make ends meet, was being shaken down. But here's the thing about people like Linda. They get cocky. They think they're untouchable. And in that arrogance, they make mistakes. The HOA sent me another violation. Notice the following week. But this one wasn't like the others. This one included a line about how failure to comply with greenscape solutions will result in legal action. Legal action. That was the moment I knew Linda had overplayed her hand. Because threatening. Legal action opened the door for me to get actual lawyers involved, and if she wanted a legal fight, I was more than ready to give her one. I didn't waste any time after that violation notice landed in my mailbox. The threat of legal action was exactly the opening I needed. If Linda thought she could bully me into silence, she was about to learn what happens when you push someone too far. The first thing I did was contact a friend of mine, Sarah, who worked as a paralegal for a local firm. Over coffee, I explained everything: the shady landscaping company, the inflated fees, the connection to Linda's brother-in-law. Sarah didn't even let me finish before she shook her head. "That's a conflict of interest at best, and fraud at worst," she said. "If you've got documents tying her to this company, she's in big trouble. And if she's been funneling HOA money into her family's pocket, that's straight up illegal." That was exactly the confirmation I needed. Sarah helped me draft a formal request for the HOA's financial records. By law, as a homeowner, I had the right to inspect the association's budgets, contracts, and meeting minutes. I submitted the request in writing, certified mail, so Linda couldn't accidentally lose it. 2 weeks later, the HOA reluctantly handed over a stack of papers. Most of it was the usual fluff: general expenses, utility bills, insurance. But tucked inside was the landscaping contract. My pulse quickened as I read it. The contract wasn't just overpriced, it was outrageous. Greenscape Solutions was charging nearly double the going rate, and the HOA had agreed to a 5-year exclusive deal with no competitive bids. 5 years. No way that happened without Linda's fingerprints all over it. And then I saw it. Linda's signature at the bottom of the agreement, right next to Paul Richards, her brother-in-law. That was it. The smoking gun. I sat back in my chair, staring at the paper. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I had proof that Linda had abused her power for personal gain. But instead of rushing to blow it all up, I decided to play it smart. I wanted to make sure every neighbor understood exactly what was going on. So I started having quiet conversations. At backyard barbecues, while walking the dog, even chatting at the mailbox, I shared bits of what I'd found. I showed copies of the contract, explained the family connection, and watched people's faces shift from confusion to anger. Word spread fast. The same neighbors who used to avoid confrontation were suddenly knocking on my door, wanting to know how they could help. Tom, the older neighbor who'd warned me about Linda before, offered to rally the folks on his street. Another neighbor, Maria, volunteered to draft a petition demanding a special HOA meeting. It was like a fire had been lit under the entire community. But Linda didn't take it lying down. As soon as she caught wind of the growing resistance, she came after me with everything she had. Another violation notice showed up, this time claiming my fence was 2 inches too high. Then came one about my trash can being visible from the street. It was laughable, but I could see her strategy: bury me in fines. Hope I'd break under the pressure. Instead, it just fueled me more. When the day of the special HOA meeting arrived, the room was packed. Neighbors who never showed up to meetings were their arms crossed, eyes burning. Linda sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand. wearing that smug expression I'd grown to hate. She opened the meeting like usual, but before she could ramble through the agenda, Maria stood up with the petition. "We demand answers about the greenscape contract," she said, her voice steady. "We want to know why this company with ties to you, Linda, was given an exclusive deal without bids." The room erupted. People clapped, others shouted in agreement. For the first time, Linda didn't look so smug. She tried to regain control, pounding her gavel and insisting the matter was private board business. But I wasn't about to let her spin it. I stood up and held the contract high for everyone to see. "This isn't private," I said loudly. "This affects every single homeowner in this neighborhood. We are being forced to pay for a service run by the HOA president's brother-in-law. That is a conflict of interest. That is corruption." Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors shouted shame. Others demanded Linda resign on the spot. Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she might actually step down. But instead, she doubled down, denying everything, claiming she had no idea who owned Greenscape. That was when I played my final card for the night. I pulled out the business registration paperwork. It showed Paul Richards listed as the owner, and Linda's own home address used as the mailing address. The room went dead silent. Everyone stared at Linda. She stammered, tried to claim it was just a coincidence, but no one was buying it. Even the other board members looked stunned. That was the night the tide turned. After the special HOA meeting, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People were talking in yards, on porches, and over fences. The dam had broken, and once the truth about Linda and Greenscape got out, there was no going back. The next morning, I received multiple calls from neighbors thanking me, offering support, and even volunteering to help document further irregularities. Tom and Maria had started a small citizen oversight committee to gather more records and receipts. It was incredible. People who had previously ignored HOA issues were now energized and united. Meanwhile, Linda tried to spin the story. She emailed residents, claiming she was being unfairly attacked and that the contract was standard procedure. But the evidence was too clear. The Greenscape documents, her signature, and the connection to her brother-in-law left no room for doubt. Things escalated quickly. A local news station caught wind of the story and requested interviews. I gave them a detailed account, showing the contracts, the communications, and how the HOA had been misleading homeowners. Within 48 hours, a segment aired highlighting the HAS corruption, causing an uproar. Linda panicked. She started calling lawyers, threatening fines, and sending eviction-style notices for minor infractions. But by now, the neighborhood had her cornered. Every move she made was documented, and our small committee ensured nothing was ignored. Then came the turning point. The city's regulatory office got involved. They opened an investigation into the HOA's financial dealings. When auditors examined the Greenscape contract, they discovered multiple violations, inflated pricing, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and failure to follow competitive bidding rules. The HOA was fined, and Linda was personally reprimanded for her role. By this point, Linda's power had crumbled. Board meetings were now tense and awkward. Neighbors openly questioned her decisions, demanded transparency, and refused to approve any new contracts without full disclosure. Meanwhile, I used this momentum to help restructure HOA oversight. I worked with the city to implement checks and balances, ensuring no single individual could manipulate contracts for personal gain again. It was a slow process, but it gave the neighborhood confidence that we were reclaiming our community. Even better, the Greenscape contract was nullified, and homeowners were refunded the excess fees they had unknowingly paid over the past year. People celebrated. What had started as a frustrating attempt to force me into a kickback scheme ended with the entire neighborhood empowered and aware of their rights. Despite the victory, Linda didn't go quietly. She tried to intimidate people, issue threats, and even file small claims lawsuits against me personally, but the evidence was overwhelming. Courts dismissed her claims, and her reputation was permanently damaged by the end of Part 4. It was clear the HOA's reign of secretive corruption was over, and the community had learned that staying silent wasn't an option when leaders abused their power. By the time Part 5 began, Linda's power had all but evaporated. The city's auditors had completed their investigation, confirming the kickback scheme, inflated contracts, and lack of transparency. The HOA board, once a source of fear and intimidation, was now under strict oversight. Linda tried to rally support from a few remaining loyalists, but the community had seen enough. Homeowners attended board meetings in record numbers, asking tough questions and refusing to approve any new contracts without full disclosure. Every attempt at manipulation failed. Financially, the HOA faced significant penalties. All fraudulent contracts were nullified, excess payments refunded to homeowners, and fines were imposed on the HOA and Linda personally. Greenscape had to return a portion of the kickbacks, and Linda was banned from serving on the HOA board for the next several years. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. People who had once quietly suffered under Linda's control were now empowered. Citizens' committees were formed to monitor HOA decisions, ensuring transparency and fairness in the future. In a private moment, I walked through my yard, looking at the newly landscaped spaces carefully chosen by residents themselves, without coercion. It wasn't just about money or contracts anymore. It was about reclaiming a sense of community, of fairness, and of pride in our homes. Neighbors thanked me for taking a stand, but I reminded them it was our unity that made the difference. We learned that persistence, patience, and knowledge of our rights could topple even the most entrenched corruption. Linda eventually moved out of the neighborhood quietly, leaving behind her office filled with papers documenting her misdeeds. Her reputation was tarnished, and no one trusted her again. The HOA had learned a hard lesson. When leaders abuse their power, a vigilant community can restore order. The neighborhood now held regular meetings to ensure transparency, and homeowners felt a renewed sense of control over their own community. From that point forward, the HOA became a model of accountability. And as I watched the neighbors laughing, planting gardens, and enjoying their yards, I realized that standing up against corruption wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about reclaiming a community sometimes. The most powerful victories come from standing up to authority with patience, knowledge, and unity. The HOA tried to silence us, manipulate contracts, and control our community. But in the end, truth and persistence won. Our neighborhood learned that when you know your rights and refuse to back down, even the most corrupt leaders can be held accountable. And that's exactly what happened. Justice was served, the community was restored, and a stronger, wiser neighborhood emerged from the fight.